Good evening, and welcome to NAMI Washington's The Brainpower Chronicles Mental Health Stories. And I know you've been welcomed to Washington multiple times already, and those of you in the Washington State Caucus were welcomed by me yesterday to our state caucus. But for those of you who have not yet stopped by the NAMI Washington table, I'm the director of NAMI Washington, and on behalf of the board of directors, the staff, our 19 affiliates, and all of our members, welcome to our beautiful state. We've loved having you here. We were so excited to have you, we made sure it got sunny every day. 3 years ago, one of our members, Bill Burnett, approached me, and he told me, Lauren, I am a storyteller, and I had a story in the Fringe Festival called Becoming More, Less Crazy. And what I would like to do, if you're interested, is offer you the opportunity to put something together where we can bring NAMI members in and they can tell their stories. The way that, who here listens to the Moth Radio Hour? Show of hands. So, you know, live, on stage, without notes, they're true stories that have happened to these wonderful 6 people. And I said, this sounds really exciting. And in 3 months, we put out an application, held interviews, identified our first cast of 6 people, and put a show on in a 110-seat theater, and we sold the theater out. So that was our first year. Last year, new cast every year. We give everybody the opportunity to apply. So 6 new cast members, same theater, an evening performance, and a matinee. We sold out both with the exception of 10 tickets. I grow these things very slowly. This year, in 2019, on November 9th, we are going to be at the Museum of Flight Theater that seats 252 people. And that will be our 2019 signature fundraising event for NAMI Washington. What we're bringing you today features 3 members of our premier 2017 cast and 3 members of our 2018 cast sharing with you what they shared with us. We did forget to buy tissues, so if you have tissues in your pockets, share them with your neighbors, because many of you are going to need them. And please, if you need to get up and walk out and leave at any time, please know nobody will be offended. We totally understand. These stories are hard, uplifting, moving, so you'll really have the whole range of emotions. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Bill Burnett, who has made this all possible.
Thank you, Lauren. Depression has a branding problem, right? No company would ever talk about their product the way most people talk about depression and treatment. Like, can you imagine the head of marketing at a car company saying, okay, here's our branding strategy for the new model. We're going to call it the Disorder. And our ads will show sad people driving alone aimlessly. And the music will be an out-of-tune piano playing REM's Everybody Hurts. And the camera will zoom in on the GPS and the destination will read, why even bother? And then the announcer will say, the Disorder, the car you'll want to hide because it makes everyone else uncomfortable. So I believe that by telling funner stories about depression and mental illness, like joyful stories that don't, lose the depth of it, but that are joyful, by doing that, we can help people who are suffering enjoy life more. And I know, because it happened to me. When I was 8, my mom sat me and my 5 brothers down on the shag carpet, this big green shag carpet in her bedroom, because I'm shag carpet old. And she told us that our dad was never going to be coming back to live with us again. And I said, oh, that's okay. I'll just kill myself. My mom didn't know what to say. Nobody talked about this stuff back then. But she subsequently went on to become a psychologist. And so she learned how to talk about depression. But by that time, it was too late. I was a teenager. And the part of my brain that thinks parents might have something useful to say had completely shut down. In my early 20s, I actually made a plan to end my life. And I even bought supplies. And at the same time, I honestly thought that I was mentally healthy. Part of the reason for my denial was because I had extreme social anxiety, so I was very isolated. And the only people I really got to know were other misfit, aspiring stand-up comedians at open mics I went to, where we were all sort of desperately hoping to become big stars because it seemed like the only sensible way to end our emotional pain. So basically, hanging out with other failing stand-up comedians misled me into thinking I was well-adjusted. Another part of my denial, though, was that I didn't want to admit that I had a mental problem I couldn't fix on my own, because I thought if that was the case, I would be unsuccessful and miserable, because those were the only stories I had heard. So I went untreated, and my mood swings got wilder, and in some years I tried to compensate with drug addiction, which, by the way, if you're thinking of trying that, I've done the research for you. It doesn't work. So as my problems became harder to deny, my denial rallied, and it rose to the challenge. When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in my early 30s, I thought, sweet, I'm special. Like, I decided it meant I drove a supercar, right? Like, I didn't just drive a regular old disorder, I drove a frickin' bipolar 2 with like a rapid cycling engine and addictive overdrive. Sweet ride, but it got a lot of unwanted attention because the steering and brakes went out a lot. So I would kind of try to disguise it, you know, I'd paint it Ferrari red and try to drive really fast so people would just be like, wow, that guy must be really well adjusted. I would draw these maps to places that in my mind where if I could get there, I'd be rich and famous and everybody would like me. And I would kind of floor it, and I'd zoom past traffic and just crash into a wall. I was in an exam room inside of an emergency room the first time I was invited to stay in a hospital's locked behavioral health unit on suicide watch. And I looked at them like they just didn't get it. I was like, oh, that is so sweet of you. Thank you, but no thank you. And then they looked at me like I didn't get it. And I glanced at the door, and I noticed there was a big burly security guard, like kind of resting his feet just outside my door on a chair. And I thought, what a weird place for that guy to take his break. And then my heart sank as I realized he was guarding me. And years of denial crashed into reality. And so in the unit, I asked one of the admin staff members to call my boss at the bank where I worked in IT to tell him to delay this certain project rollout because I couldn't be on site to support it. And she never made the call because she thought I was just imagining that I had a computer job at a bank. This, by the way, was the late 90s. I think nowadays, if you go into a psych ward and say you work in technology, they'll believe you. But I was very frustrated, and I went back to talk to her to try to explain later, and she just brushed me off like I was a house cat that had jumped on the counter. And by the way, I mean no disrespect to house cats. Their struggle is real. So in that same visit, I saw a bubbly psychiatrist who talked to me about my job and treated me like an equal, a peer. And we even laughed and joked some, and she talked about my depression like it was as normal as a broken foot and just as treatable. And by speaking about all that stuff joyfully, she made me feel like I belonged at a time when I had never felt more like an outsider, just looking in at billions of people laughing and having fun together without me. But I still didn't get treatment because I was going to fix myself. I even had a plan for quitting drugs. I was going to get high one last time and then quit. I got caught in a kind of an interesting loop on that. 8 years later, I got a second invitation to stay in a hospital's behavioral health unit. And this time I healed in a completely unexpected way. I was sitting after dinner, me and another patient, one night in this hygienic TV/dining area, and she told me what was going on in her head and in her life when she got in her Jeep and drove it to the edge of the Grand Canyon and sat there revving the engine, thinking about driving over. And she told me why she didn't do it and what she thought she might do next in her life. And I told her about my attempt, which didn't involve any of the world's 7 natural wonders. Interestingly enough, did involve an episode of Gilligan's Island. So we nodded in recognition. I had never spoken to somebody who understood and had been there. And that simple human connection made me feel like I was already awesome, just being exactly who I was, exactly where I was. And that felt so good that in that stay, I asked other patients for their stories. And I saw that these were like kind, smart, humble people with just an amazing inner strength. And and I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with a sense of connection and community. And when I got out of there, when I would feel the pain of depression, and this is still true today when I feel depression, I will think of all the millions of people around the planet who are going through the exact same thing. So, and I know, right, when I do that, I know that I'm not alone, I'm not broken, and I'm not a freak. I'm gorgeous. We're all gorgeous. And so that experience kind of led me to realize there was nothing to be ashamed of. And at that point, I wasn't ashamed anymore of having mental health conditions. So a while after that, I checked myself into outpatient treatment for addiction. The heart of 12-step meetings is raw, unsanitized stories from people on the edge fighting for their lives, and some more polished stories from people who were there talking about how they learned to get to the other side and have lives that they actually enjoyed. And those people gave me hope. They made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a good life. And it slowed the spinning of my negative thoughts enough that I started saying to myself, Bill, this is your situation. What are you going to do about it? You know, it doesn't matter, right or wrong, fair, unfair, your fault, not your fault. Doesn't matter, irrelevant. This is your situation. What are you going to do about it? And I did a lot of things. One is I saw a doctor, and he put me on antidepressants, and I said, I will only do 3 months. And he said, well, we have kind of a rule of thumb. which is don't go off antidepressants in Seattle in the winter. That actually made a lot of sense to me. So I followed the doctor's advice and later did some therapy. I also put a lot of time and energy into mindfulness, and I started learning how to do something that had always seemed impossible, which was to socialize with people. It's a whole other story. Turns out you can be afraid of people most of your life and then not be afraid of them. While this was going on, I had gotten some sleeping pills for insomnia. And then when I was sleeping again, I kept refilling the prescription, even though I felt really good, because all my life I'd sort of like thought that way, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's an opportunity to build this sort of big sleep kit that I could have. And when I finally got enough pills, I put them all in one bottle and I held it and I stared at it and I thought, my timing sucks. I'm happy now. So the next day I threw the pills out and I wondered, I did wonder if I would regret it. Like, is this some crazy moment that doesn't make sense? But, you know, several months later, nothing had changed. I felt great. And like I realized that darkness that I'd lived in pretty much since childhood had been vanquished in the fire of other people's stories. And I thought, this changes everything. I could get kittens, which I did. How I stay well today, how I manage my condition is I meditate badly. Like, I drink coffee while meditating. But it still helps. I read what I call woo-woo books, like Eckhart Tolle or Buddhist scriptures, things like that. They provide some relief from the constant churning of my thoughts. And I make a point of, meeting new people and maintaining friendships. I mean, that becomes a priority that I spend time on. So I still drive the good old bipolar 2. And it actually runs pretty well most of the time, but I'm a much better driver. Like now, if a warning light comes on, see, it used to be if a warning light came on, I assumed it was like a prompt for me to curse at God. But now if a warning light comes on, like I'm driving down the street and I see, warning, negative thoughts may appear larger than they are. I'll pause and take a breath and realize like everything's okay. Or if the Checkmania light goes on, I'll put a pause on making any big decisions. I will even stop for sirens, like, "Woo, woo, sir, step away from the computer. Do not send that email." And so that's how I'm rebranding depression and mental illness with lightness. Because why model the despair that people already know all about when we can show them connection and hope and shine a beacon of hope for actual fun? My mom, after she retired as a therapist, told me that the one thing she'd learned that really consistently heals people is when she can give love and they can receive it. And so tonight I'm going to introduce 5 storytellers, and they're going to tell stories. Some are very, very difficult, but they're all very uplifting because they connect us. They make us feel like, hey, we're all right. We're all in this together. So these would be very uplifting, but as you're listening to their stories, consider the fact that they're not just telling you a story. They're giving love, and I invite you to receive it. With that, I would like to introduce. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to introduce our first storyteller, Carolyn Gary.
I can't believe I made it here tonight. If I would have had this invitation 15 or 20 years ago, I wouldn't have made it here tonight. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. It's slang, but I have the real kind. Mine is a lot about scratches and scuffs and dents and dings, some of the ones that we can all see and some of the ones that maybe only I can. If I would have tried to make it here tonight, it would have gone something like this. Oh my gosh, I want to be there so badly, but it means that I'm going to have to drive my car and I'm going to have to use the key and it scratches the lock. I've seen it happen. And I'm just going to have to take my time and do it really slowly. And I'm not going to look to see if anybody's watching. And I'm going to take that really smooth road, the one with, oh my gosh, that was a huge pothole. I know it scratched my car. I felt it. And I'm going to have to pull over right now and fix it and take it to a body shop. But it's the weekend. It's a Friday night, so they're going to be closed. But maybe I could get some touch-up paint and fix it right now. I have to fix it right now. I wouldn't have made it here tonight because it would have taken me about 5 hours, what should take somebody 15 minutes. I'm so glad to see, a couple hundred of my closest friends here. Thank you all for being here. I was really uncomfortable when I was thinking about my story, and I would like to invite you to be really uncomfortable with me tonight. My story started with a pair of Nikes. It was 1995, and I was going into the 8th grade, and I was so excited because my mom offered to take my sisters and I back to school shopping, and it was a really big deal because I'm from a very small town in Texas. It's exactly what you're thinking. We didn't even have a super Walmart, much less a mall. So we went to the next closest city, and these Nikes that I wanted, they were maroon and forest green and bright white leather. They were so cool, and I couldn't wait to get them out of the box until I did. Shoes get scuffed. I wasn't new to shoes, though. I'd worn shoes all of my life, so why all of a sudden, every single day, did I need to, for an hour, go home and clean my shoes with baby wipes, and if those didn't work, soft scrub? I cleaned them until that bright white leather wore through, and one day my mom found me after school in my room, in my closet, in the dark, cleaning my shoes, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know, cleaning my shoes, I guess, but I don't know." And she said, "Would you please stop? That's kind of gross." And I said, "Yeah, I'll stop." But of course I wasn't going to stop. I had to do this. I needed to do this. So I went on cleaning my shoes in secret for years. Fast forward to when I was a senior in high school and I was getting my first car. What a privilege. It's a symbol of freedom and the open road and the ability just for a few minutes to drive away from your parents. I had these big ideas of loading up the car and all of my friends, we could go to Sonic, it'd be so much fun. And that never happened, though. I found out that I would be going to college at Texas Tech University. It's about an 8-hour drive from my hometown, and my mom, super brave, decided to go with me. We packed the back seat and the trunk of my Ford Taurus, and if you could imagine playing Tetris, But if instead of Tetris blocks you were using raw eggs, that's what it was like. Everybody walked on eggshells around me. So it took hours and hours and hours and hours to pack this Ford Taurus. And the next day, we were on the road. And somewhere on this 8-hour drive, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that my mom's arm was reaching over to adjust the radio dial. But as she was doing that, I had to watch her. What if she wasn't doing it just right? What if her fingernail would scratch the meticulously polished radio display? So, as she reached toward me, my arms went toward her, and before I knew it, we spun completely out of control, 360, middle of the road, full speed. We were inches from a ditch when we ran off the road. We sat there when the car stopped, and I think, though, what sat with me longer all of these years is that the moment that I knew that we were okay, I knew that we were alive, and you think, okay, it didn't flip, I feel my body. All I wanted to do was walk around my car and inspect it for scratches. There was one. It was about 2 inches in length by about 1/4 of an inch in height. And all I could do was think about how I could fix it right now. I've got to fix it right now. I didn't hug my mom. I didn't ask her if she was okay. And it's as if I value the material things in my life more than myself or the ones that I love. And that's not me. That's not who I am. And I feel such shame. But I'm from a really small town in Texas. It's exactly what you're thinking. We didn't talk about this kind of stuff, so you just keep driving in silence. Because if you say anything aloud, you're weird, and if other people hear, then you're crazy, and that's super crazy because the whole town's gonna talk about you, so you just keep driving. The next several years, my life continued to spiral completely out of control, just like my car did. I found myself in an abusive relationship, and I loved him, though, because I didn't have to drive my car. I didn't have to sleep in my apartment. See, OCD, if you have the kind that I have, it jumps from one thing to another. It's kind of sneaky like that, and it had manifested in new ways, one of them being my apartment, the other one being this iMac computer. And just like those Nikes and just like my car, the moment that I had it, I hated it. I believed, and I really mean believed, that if I looked at it, if I raised my voice, if I spoke, or even breathed, that it would shatter into a million pieces. I knew it. It had become easier to fear him than to fear my own mind. So I stayed with him for a really long time, and it wasn't until he threatened me with a knife that I said, "That's enough. That's enough," and I drove away from him in this Ford Taurus. It sounds so easy with words, and it was not, but it was the first time that I found myself in the driver's seat of my own life, and I wanted more of that. It felt really good. So while I can't drive away from OCD, and I never I can take steps on the road to recovery. Part of that journey found me living in this little town in Texas called Austin, and they have a saying there, which is, "Keep Austin weird," and I said, "No problem, these are my people." I met my husband, and we made a journey to Houston, Texas, which is where I really began to recover. There's a therapy called Exposure Response and Prevention Therapy, ERP, and it saved my life. It's like going to the gym for your mind, and I have a really in shape mind now. We then moved to Seattle, and I started a business, and I am a mother of a beautiful 3-year-old boy named Marshall. And these are all places that I didn't think this journey would take me. I can't believe that I made it here tonight. I wish I could go back and tell myself that I would be. And more than anything, I want people who are struggling like me to know that I see them and I believe them and that they matter, and that maybe this perceived weakness is actually an incredible source of strength just to show up. I am really delighted to tell you that I have upgraded to a 2005 silver Toyota Camry. And it is filled to the brim with goldfish crackers, thanks to Marshall, and sticky fingers, and it is perfect.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Carolyn's also a graphic designer who built the Stay Awesome logo that you got in a sticker tonight. So thank you for that, Carolyn. I'd like to introduce our next storyteller, and he's somebody who's also led a lot of workshops and does a lot of runs storytelling events here in Seattle. And it's a real pleasure to have him here tonight. Please welcome Paul Currington.
Get this up here. The thing about depression is that it magnifies the bad and diminishes the good. Nothing good is ever good enough, and anything bad leads to crippling sadness. And the worst part is the loneliness you feel when you're caught up in it. Now, Carol was the only one who could take away that loneliness, which is why it was so hard when we broke up after 7 years. But the thing that kept me from going over the edge is that we actually kept sleeping together. And it turns out that sex is great for depression. It's like this miracle pill. I don't know why Blue Cross doesn't cover it. They should. Well, we're about 1.5 years into this new cutting-edge therapy I discovered when I decided to go downtown and see a friend of mine play guitar in this tiny little cafe. And I get there early, and I'm sitting in the back, and I see Carol walk in. And I was excited to see her. I hadn't seen her in a while. I was looking forward to catching up with her after the show. And she sits down about 20 feet away with some friends waiting for the show to start. And the show does start. And about 10 minutes in, this guy walks in. And he sits down next to Carol, and he puts his arm around her. And then he starts running his hand up and down her back, very sensually. And I realized this is not a friend. This is a boyfriend. And Carol and I are not going to get back together. And it was like we were breaking up all over again, except this time it was in public and in front of friends. And the worst part was I was trapped. The place was packed, and they were between me and the exit. So for 20 minutes, I had to sit there and just watch him run his hand up and down her back very sensually. Well, finally, there was a break in the show, and I ran out of the coffee shop. I got in my car. I drove home. I got a razor blade from the medicine cabinet, and I tried to end my life. Now, I don't remember a lot of what happened in those hours I spent on the floor of my living room with that blade pressed against my flesh, my wrist, and there was a screaming in my head, and I felt like my body was just exploding, and all I wanted to do was end that pain. I was doing everything I could to end that pain, and I stayed that way for hours until finally my body just gave up, and I tipped over, and when I could finally roll back up, somehow I found an 800 number, and I called a crisis line, which I'd never done before, and I got a guy on the phone who could not have been less impressed with my little situation. I'm like 2 minutes into the story about the boyfriend and the coffee shop. He goes, "Pal, do you have a plan on how you're going to kill yourself?" I said, "Yes, I have a razor." He said, "Razor? No, way too painful, plus very messy. What about a gun? Do you have a gun?" I go, "No, I don't have a gun." He said, "Pal, are you sure you don't have a gun in the house?" I said, "I'm vegan. We don't usually have guns." And he goes, "Oh, concerned about your health, are you?" And he says, what about pills? Do you have any pills? I go, I don't know. I think I got some Advil. He goes, Advil? You don't have anything stronger than Advil. This goes on for an hour. He berates my lack of planning. I cry. He tells me to go to the hospital. I say, I can't because I haven't met my deductible. And then I finally pass out, like 3 in the morning, thunk. I hope he counted that as a save. So I get up the next morning, and I am absolutely ashamed of myself. Not because I tried to kill myself, but because I failed, man. One more failure and a lifetime of failure. And I thought, maybe that guy on the phone was right. Maybe I just needed a better plan. So I decided I would stop eating. Not altogether all at once. I would just eat less and less over the weeks and months coming up until I disappeared. I thought, I'm vegan, this won't take long. But at the same time, I made a deal with the universe. I said, if you want me to stick around, you show me a sign, and I'll start eating. Now, as soon as I made this deal, weird things started to happen in my life. For one thing, my friend Eve called me out of the blue. Now, Eve is a 75-year-old hippie who lives in a bus, who I hadn't seen in 20 years. She calls up to say, hey, I'm driving through town to see my grandkids. I want to stop in and catch up. I want to catch up. And as much as I love Eve and I missed her, I did not want to see her because Eve has this special power that I didn't want to deal with. Her special power is if there's something you don't want to say, she will get you to say it. It's like waterboarding, but with hugs. It's hug boarding, basically, is what it is. So within 10 minutes, she's got the whole story out of me. And she said, say no more, I'm moving in, somebody has to keep an eye on you. I said, oh, Eve, I don't know. I'm not very good company these days. 2 days later, she's moved in. Doesn't care. And actually, she was very helpful. She's a very kind woman, and we spent many hours talking. But when I wasn't talking to Eve, I was out walking. I walked everywhere, man, for hours, miles every day. It was the only way I could keep my head straight. And one day, I'm walking through downtown, and I see a bunch of people standing outside this little building. And as I get closer, I see that it's the Alano Club, the place where the AA meetings happen. Now, I never had a drinking problem, but when I got up there, I thought, for some reason, I think I need to go in. I don't know why. I think I just might have to go in here. So I did. I followed these guys in, and I sat in this rickety old chair with my back against the wall, and I just listened. Now, I start these meetings the same way. Random people will say the 12 steps. So someone over here will say, admit you're powerless over alcohol. And someone over there will say, admit that only a higher power can return you to sanity. And as I sat there and listened, it all started to make a lot of sense, these steps. Someone would say, make a list of everyone you hurt and apologize. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I should do that. And someone would say, turn your life over to a higher power. And I thought, oh, I've been meaning to do that. I really should start to do that. And by the end of that meeting, I was in shock. After all the sharing and everything, I'd never seen people treat each other with such forgiveness and such humility. I'd never felt that before. So I went back. And I kept going back day after day. I went to the same place at the same time. I sat in the same chair. And I just listened. Because every time I went, I heard something I needed to hear. And after a couple of months, I just had to say thank you. I had to say something. I hadn't said anything yet. So I blurted out in the middle of a meeting, hey, you know what? You guys don't know me. You don't know why I'm here. I don't even know why I'm here. But I just want to thank you. I got to thank you. This has meant so much to me. This has been so incredibly healing to see how you treat each other and how you can love each other. And I don't know that you know this, but when you say those 12 steps at the beginning of each meeting, you look right at me as though you know I need to hear these words. And I just want you to know you're right. I do need to hear these words. And this lady across the room from me, she had like 30 years sobriety. She said, you're right, Paul, we don't know exactly why you're here. Everyone comes for different reasons, but we're glad you found us. And I want you to know that we will love you until you can learn to love yourself. And I just about broke down. No one had ever said anything like that. My family, a friend, like, no, I'd never heard that before. And she said, the reason we look at you when we say the 12 steps is that they're actually written on the wall right over your head. You sit in the same chair every day. It's just reading the poster. Well, even though I had these meetings to go to and I had even the evenings to talk to, after a while I could feel myself slipping into that depression again, partly because I was starving. I'd lost about 30, 40 pounds. Cookies were starting to show up at my desk anonymously at work. And I was just cranky all the time. And one night I was all alone and I was just furious, just angry at the world. And I ran out of my apartment and I'm just stomping around my neighborhood, screaming at the moon, "You owe me a sign." I held up my end of the deal. If you want me to stick around, you better show me a sign because this isn't going to last much longer. And I'm just screaming at everything. And finally, in the middle of this rant, I find myself back at my apartment and I see there's a Tupperware bowl of soup on my porch with a little note from Karina that says, "Hey, just stop by to see how you're doing. Want to make sure you're okay. Made some soup for you." And I have never been so angry at soup. Because I know what the universe is doing. It's trying to say, "Hey, there's a bowl of soup. There's your sign." But that is not the sign because I have soup. I don't need soup. I need something a little more magnificent. All right, I'm looking for Red Sea, burning bush, land of Canaan, something along those lines. So I step over the soup to let soup know I don't care. And I open the door of my apartment and I am hit by this blast of heat, man. It knocks me backwards, and I look in my kitchen and it's just pulsing with heat. And I run in and I saw that I left a burner on. And there's a cast iron pan on the burner and it's just glowing red hot like a forge. And everything around it is curling up and crisping. It's like seconds from bursting in the flame. I'm just screaming in my head, I can't burn this apartment house down. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to hurt myself. This can't be happening. And I run into the kitchen and I turn off the burner and I fall to the floor and I start screaming, "Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why?" And after a while, the whys turned to thank yous. And I just sat there on the floor whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Now, I've learned a lot since that night in the coffee shop. One of the most important things I've learned is that faith is a choice. All my life, I've been looking for something or someone to believe in, to tell me that I'm worthwhile, that I belong, that I'm worth something. Now I know that you don't find faith, you just decide to have it. The other day I was in the kitchen cooking. I can do that now, I'm eating. And I was listening to the radio and I started dancing alone. Just me and Sheryl Crow. And I thought, you know what? I'm not alone, man. My life is filled with love. And more importantly, it's filled with people who want to be around me, even when I am the only one in the room. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Good night.
Thank you, Paul. So Paul was there for our first Brainpower Chronicles when we didn't know a lot about how to organize a workshop. And over the years of doing this, it's gotten very organized. And if you're interested in telling your own story or running your own storytelling workshop, I've built it into 3 infographics with a little design help from Carolyn. And they're all for free. You can download them, do whatever with them on Stay Awesome. So if it's interesting to you how we train the storytellers and you might want to do it, they're there. Our next storyteller was also in the very first Brainpower Chronicles cast, and was a really, really beautiful moment as we were going through around the table, everybody trying to figure out how to tell their story. And her story is very, very difficult, and I could see her struggling, and then she turned when we got to her, and she kind of lit up, and she said, "I know how I'm going to tell my story, but I'm not going to tell you because that would be taking away her story." So please welcome Kathleen Gilligan.
My ex-husband and I, Lyman, lived close to each other so that our 3 children could migrate back and forth between our homes. And this was out on Vashon Island, a place where the clock seems turned back 50 years, where kids can be seen riding horses down the street, and there's not even one traffic light on the entire island, just a 4-way stop in the middle of town. Our youngest child, Palmer, was our favorite child, and that was okay with his brother and sister because he was their favorite also. Nicknamed the Fact Man when he was 2 years old, Palmer's lively ways and ability to take no prisoners in conversation around topics such as military aircraft and the Latin names of plants made him endlessly interesting and the easy leader of this pack of boys that migrated with him between our homes. Lyman's house had things like throwing knives and trampolines and microscopes, while I tended more towards farm animals and the garden, and more importantly to these boys, food. It wasn't unusual for this pack of boys to show up at my house after a night of boying at Lyman's house and ask me to cook breakfast. And I would do this, and they would stuff themselves, and they would hug me and thank me and be out on their way again into this bucolic world of Vashon Island. And then suddenly, and almost inexplicably, on a beautiful October morning, in October of 2012, my precious 14-year-old son ended his charmed life. Palmer was a well-trained marksman and hunter, and we were a well-known mother-son team at our community gun club. My son ended his life using a shotgun that I had given to him on his 10th birthday. When Palmer was small, I used to say that he stopped my heart at least once a day, for he was physically daring and incredibly curious. But on this day, he stopped my heart for good. When Palmer died by suicide, I died. I was alone when I found out that my child was dead, standing in the parking lot of the VA hospital where I was working. Lyman had left 11 messages for me on my phone, and as I listened, I was confused, and so I called him, and he adamantly confirmed that our son was dead, and I just kept hearing myself screaming, "That's not true." I started to drive to the ferry, slowing just long enough to think about speeding up and driving 100 miles an hour into a telephone pole. When I made it to the ferry terminal, I realized that the ferry workers were waiting for me. And it occurred to me that the sheriff had called ahead and asked them to look out for me. And I thought, that's so Vashon. And one young worker offered to drive my truck onto the boat, probably because I was drooling and shivering and crying uncontrollably. And when I got to the 4-way stop in my little town, my disassociation from reality was complete when I saw that the coroner's van had stopped across from me at the 4-way stop. And at that moment, all I wanted to do was hug my child. It was the same thing that had driven me to hug Palmer to my chest when he was born. It was driving me at that moment. And I just heard myself screaming like a raging mother bear for that van to stop. But of course, it kept going. And the rest of that day was centered around hugging. And my sweet 16-year-old daughter who needed to be pinned down more than hugged. My friends who showed up like this river at my door. And Palmer's pack who came to sit in his room. Hug, hug, hug. But that idea had turned ugly, as most of the hugs were between shocked, snot-covered young people and me, the mother of the dead boy. And my eyes swelled shut to the point where I didn't even know who I was hugging. And Palmer's funeral, attended by 600 people, brought more hugs, most of them not welcome, as I only wanted to hug people. I didn't want to be hugged, and I especially hated the pity-filled hugs. About 3 weeks after Palmer's funeral, I panicked as I saw the Crystal Geyser truck driving down my long driveway. Palmer had a way of talking me into things, and this water cooler was one of them. And I had forgotten to put the empty bottle out. So I walked out, and the young man jumped out of his truck, and he gave me a big cheery hello, followed immediately by, "What's up? Is the boy cutting down on his water intake this month?" And normally we exchanged 4 bottles. And as I stood there with my paltry single bottle, I just blurted out, "He's dead. He killed himself October 4th. And this young man froze, and then he just opened his arms, and I walked into this relative stranger's hug and sobbed. And then I canceled my water delivery. And about a month later, I worked up the courage to go out in public in my little town. I pulled into the hardware store and sat in my truck for a while and furtively looked around for someone I might know. You see, when you live in a small town and your well-loved and well-known, successful 14-year-old is the first youth suicide in 30 years, you gain a certain unwanted notoriety. And I often felt that I had a scarlet letter S on my chest for suicide, for fear and stigma were very much a part of my grief journey. And I made it into the hardware store, and the very first person I saw was the father of one of Palmer's preschool friends. And he saw me, and he panicked and did this kind of side-to-side evasive maneuver, and he turned to run away, and I said, "Brett!" And he turned back to face me, and he threw up his hands in anguish and said, "I don't know what to say." And I said, "You say hi." But there were no hugs that day. And fortunately, the next month, I worked up my courage to go out in public again, and I raised my gaze just enough in the grocery store to see the mother of one of Palmer's teammates. And she warmly smiled and she said, "I know what to do with you." Big hug. About 18 months after Palmer's death, I discovered Forefront, a nonprofit suicide prevention and legislative action group based at University of Washington. And I wrote to the founder, Jen Stuber, and told her about my son's story and asked how I could help out. And she immediately emailed me back and said, "I wish that I could give you a hug." And this surprised me that a professor from the university was wishing to hug me. But Jen and I became fast friends, and my son Palmer became the poster child for change in Washington State. And his horrifying story about a well-trained young marksman turning a gun on himself was one that I learned to tell with grace and brevity as I testified in favor of new suicide prevention laws in Washington State. Thank you. I was invited to speak at the governor's mansion during Forefront's Legislative Action Day, and as I stood there at the podium in my pantyhose and suit, my PTSD kicked in, and I frantically scanned the audience and locked eyes with a young veteran who gently nodded encouragement. And when I was finished telling Palmer's story, I thought, I'm going down, as I felt my entire body taken over by the shakes. And as I tried to make my way from the podium, I saw another face, but this was a face I had only seen on the big screen. And the actor, Tom Skerritt, opened his arms, and I walked into his hug, and he held me to his chest until my shivering stopped. I was standing in the governor's mansion being hugged by Viper from Top Gun. But this was a turning point in this endurance race called grief, for I had found people who genuinely cared about mental health and were doing something about it. And now, 6.5 years after Palmer's passing, I continue to volunteer extensively with Forefront. I serve on the Safer Homes Suicide Aware Coalition, and I attend gun shows all over the Northwest, talking to people about suicide and handing out free locking devices for firearms. And sometimes I tell Palmer's story, and I see the tears form in the eyes of parents and grandparents and veterans and seemingly tougher-than-nails firearms owners. And I thank them for listening, and they thank me. And sometimes I offer them a hug, and they ask me for one. And we walk away from each other, and I know that my boy's story may have changed or possibly even saved their life. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I want to take just a moment of silence for Palmer and for all the people we've lost to mental health challenges. Such a powerful story and such a beautiful way to tell it with the context of hugs. I'd like to introduce our next storyteller. Please welcome Bob Krulish.
Feels so short. Good evening. I'm so glad to be here tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about stigma with mental illness and also about my journey to being diagnosed. But before I get into that too much, when I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I did not realize there was a lot of stigma around it. I didn't even know what it was when I first heard it. But I started to find out that there was. And what do you think of the shirt? Love the shirt? I love this shirt. I love this shirt because every time I go to a crowded restaurant, I never have to wait for a table. I don't even have to wait for my food. It comes out so fast. And I don't even have to wait for my check. Every crowded restaurant to me right now is like fast food when I wear this shirt. So I get along with the shirt very well. Now let me just tell you a little bit about my journey, and I'm going to tie this back into my shirt a little bit later on today. But I want to talk about my journey to getting diagnosed. You see, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 51 years old. That was 10 years ago. And if you do the math, I know that makes me 41. So just leave it at that. So about 10 years ago, I got diagnosed, and about 3 or 4 years before that, I was misdiagnosed with anxiety disorder. And unfortunately, what my doctor did was gave me an antidepressant, not knowing that I had bipolar disorder. And if you give, some of you know, but if you don't know, if you give somebody with bipolar 1 like I have, an antidepressant without a mood stabilizer, it puts them into mania. And they stay in mania while they're on that antidepressant until they get a mood stabilizer. So I was in a manic state for 3 years. Yeah, and I completely destroyed my life. I had a beautiful life. I had a beautiful family. I had everything you'd want to have, and I destroyed it. And all of a sudden, I found myself depressed and divorced. I don't know which came first, but either way, I needed to go see a therapist. I was going through like a mixed episode. I was in mania, but I was in a depressed environment and a depressed situation. So I went and saw a therapist. And after a few hours of therapy with her, she said, "I think you might have bipolar disorder." And in my mania, I said, "You're crazy. I'm not the crazy one. That's ridiculous. I don't have bipolar disorder. I don't even know what it is." Isn't that funny? I'm arguing with her because I don't even know what it is. But I'm telling you, I definitely don't have it. And I'm very convinced that I don't have this thing. I don't even know what it is. But I make a bet with her. I said, "Okay, I'm going to make a bet with you. I'm going to go ahead and I'll go see a doctor, and we'll see. We'll see who's the winner here. I know I'm going to be, so you're just going to have to deal with it." So I call the doctor's office, and I make an appointment. And, of course, they say, can't be late for the appointment. Don't be late for the doctor. And I said, okay, I want to respect that because I really need to win this bet. So by this point, I've lost everything. I've lost the family. I've lost the home. I've lost the cars. I've lost all my money. I gave it all away. And I'm down to just pennies in my pocket. and I have enough money to take the bus to this doctor. So I get on the bus, and I ask the bus driver if he can take me to Northrop Way in Bellevue, which is not too far from where we are. And he said, sure, I know exactly where that is. And I'm like, great, this can be a piece of cake. So he takes me, and he goes, okay, here's Northrop Way, sir. And I said, do you know where this number is? He goes, no, I'm not sure, which way you have to go. And I said, no problem. So I go bolting out. Now, it's early enough. It's very early in the morning because I don't want to be late because I need to win this bet. And I definitely want to be seen today because I had to wait for the appointment for quite a while. So now I go running down Northrop Way, and I'm looking, and the numbers are going in the wrong direction. So what do you do when the numbers are going in the wrong direction? You turn around, of course. So now I'm turning around, and I'm running as fast as I can, and the numbers are going back in the right direction until I cross this main road, 148th Avenue. And I cross this road, and all of a sudden, I'm not on Northrop Way anymore. I'm on 20th Street. If you live around there, you know what I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, Northrop Way, folks, was right here. And now I'm just right here. Where did it go? How could that be 20th Street? What kind of monster did this to me? Right? Right. I can't be late. I got to get going. So I'm running down 20th Street now, thinking that if I run really fast, it'll change back into Northrop Way. I mean, that's the obvious thing, isn't it? So as I'm running down the street, I'm running into cars because I'm hoping that somebody will help me. And all I'm getting is a bunch of people raising their middle finger, sticking it out their hand out the road, yelling, "You're number one, Bob. Keep on going." And I thought, well, that's really nice. What a nice bout of encouragement. But nobody stopped, believe it or not. Nobody stopped. I mean, I'm sure my hair is sticking straight up by this point. And I see a road worker. And I'm like, hallelujah. She's got to know the roads. I mean, there must be a course she had to take on roads. Right? Right? I mean, you're a road worker. So I run up to her and I say, "Ma'am, miss, what did you people do with Northrop Way? I don't think this is funny anymore because I'm going to be late. And I need to find Northrop Way, so just tell me, please, where did you put it?" And she goes, "I don't know where it is." And I'm like, what kind of road worker are you? Where did you go to learn how to do roads? And she goes, "Well, I don't live around here." And I said, "You don't live around here? Well, where do you live?" She goes, "About 30 miles away." And I said, "Why don't you go back there and work on those roads where you know where they are so somebody could have been here today who knew where the road was?" And so I said a lot of other things that I'm not really proud of, and I really let her have it. And I was very mean, but I'm in a manic, irritated, agitated state. Now I'm going to be late for this doctor. I have no idea. So what do you do now? Well, I turn around, and I think if I run really fast the other way, I'm going to find Northrop Way. Yeah, I must have just passed it. I was running so fast, I must have just passed it. So I start running back the other way, and lo and behold, a car comes pulling over and just about clips me and pulls on the sidewalk. And I'm like, officer. Right? I'm like, okay, okay, great. Now, I'm just thinking, this guy's not going to know where Northrop Way is either. Because he's probably from 30 miles away. So he gets out of the car, and he goes, "Sir, what's the matter?" And I'm like, "Nothing. Everything's fine." And he goes, "No, I don't think so. The road worker down the road flagged me down." I'm like, I am going to be late. I said, "Really? What did she say?" He said, "She said you're lost." And I said, "Yeah, but did she say anything else?" He said, "No, she just said you're lost." I said, Oh, what a precious angel that lady is. Thank you, thank you. So he goes, where are you trying to go? And I said, to my psychiatrist. He goes, psychiatrist? Great idea. Hop in the back. True story. So I got a ride in the back of a police car without any handcuffs. Pretty good, pretty good. Pretty good. You try to do that. And I got chauffeured to my doctor's appointment. But now, because he doesn't know where Northern Way is. Yay! And it was only like a half a mile from where I stopped. Oh my gosh. Anyway, as he's pulling into the parking lot of the doctor's office, I say, sir, officer, he's not going to see me because I'm late. And the officer turns around like this. Oh, he'll be seeing you. And he'll be seeing you right now. Little did I know that he was coming in with me because he didn't want to have to deal with me any longer. So we go into the doctor's office, and I go up to the counter, and he hangs back, and the gal at the counter, the receptionist, says, I'm sorry you're late. He's not going to see you. And all of a sudden, I hear this person coming right up behind me, and this officer goes, ma'am, he'll be seeing him, and he'll be seeing him right now. And I did. The doctor came right out. And it was probably the quickest interview a doctor's ever had with a person. Because in about 5 minutes, he said, I've had enough. I've heard enough. You have bipolar 1. You're definitely crazy. You lost that bet. And he gives me 4 prescriptions, and I walk out the door. Well, he actually quickly ushers me out the door. The good news is that after dozens of medication changes and hundreds of hours of therapy, I am well. Thank you. Thank you. And I live a really good life. And I learned that treatment works. And I know that treatment works for just about everybody with bipolar disorder. So my encouragement to everybody is to get treatment and to find the right treatment that works for you. Now, I want to tie that back in. I want to end with the shirt, okay? I want to erase the stigma of mental illness. And I know that you're going to help me do that. I want to end the silence. And I want to end that stigma. And I want to go into a crowded restaurant, and I want to be wearing this shirt, and I want to one day have to wait for a table, just like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Bob didn't mention this in his talk, but he was actually a brilliant mathematician, worked in the insurance industry for a lot of years, statistician, and came up with some formulas that changed the industry. And I mention that because I've started a podcast called Talking About Mental Health. And I've just only put one episode up. It's at stayawesome.com. But Bob also did an episode of that where we're talking about mental health at work. How do you talk about it? What do you say? Whether it's somebody else or you. So Bob is a man of many talents. Please welcome our final storyteller who was recently appointed, and there's a ceremony for this next weekend, to be a living legacy by the city of Seattle. So please welcome Mary Ann Moorman.
They didn't say the best for last. I'm just last. Arch, Winford. Clutch. Clutch. Winford. What is it? A machine? An animal? Music? I didn't know the first time I heard it. This noise exploded behind my desk, and I turned around and knocked all of my books and my papers on the floor to find where the noise was coming from, and I didn't see anything. I turned back, and there's the teacher looking at me. You are disrupting the class. What are you doing? I'm just trying to find this noise. There's no noise. Students do any noise, any noise. And the kids were laughing. They were snide. The next day, clutch, and I turned around and was sent to the headmistress' office. Demoted to a remedial math class because I was too slow to keep up and too disruptive. Disruptive was the last thing I wanted to hear. It was going to make Mama so mad because I was sort of rowdy and kind of rambunctious, and she hated that. So when she found out disruptive, and I tried to tell her I was just looking for where the noise came from, she said it was my overactive imagination and put me on bathroom duty for a month, which meant out comes the Drano and the ammonia and the peroxide and the Lysol to scrub to Mama's sanitation standards. I didn't talk about what happened that year of my 8th grade until last year. It's the last closet of my life to come out. But I started talking about it in case it might be helpful to someone else. Come with me. Blue Ridge Valley of Virginia, 1962. I am 13 years old. It's small, and it's a time in life where there are a number of small private schools being built, and Mama really wanted me to go to a small school near home. I really didn't, but she really did, and she got Daddy to talk to the preacher, who talked to a teacher, who talked to a friend, who got me a scholarship, and she was so happy because now she could keep me close. And you have to be close. You just don't know what's going to happen to anybody these days. Just heightening the noose she kept around my neck. I was the charity, chubby kid with no friends. It was cold that fall in the valley. I walked home slow. I had no need to get there early. Enjoyed the sweet smell of smoke, leaves burning in the mountains. And then suddenly I heard a noise. And then I thought I heard my name. And I didn't see anybody. Man, where are you? The voice answered back. Everywhere. Who are you? Oh, no. Let's have some fun. I thought an invisible friend was better than no friend at all. So I was happy to have fun. Only Lorenzo was very naughty, and we broke out street lamps, and we bent mailboxes, and we got my brother's chemistry set and the Bunsen burner and lit it and scorched the bottom of the cabinets. But when he told me to pick up the rock and chunk it upside my brother's head, I watched the blood come out of my brother's ear. I saw the shock in my father's face, and I told Lorenzo I couldn't play with him anymore. And that's when he got mean and started calling me fat, dumb, stupid, and threatened to slice my mother's throat, threatened that if I didn't obey him, he was going to put a knife right in my father's back. So you understand why I had to obey when he took the Drano in my hand, and I had to put the Drano on the back of my hand, and then I took the hydrogen peroxide and drip, and watched blue bubbles percolate every night, drip, and he told me to get bandages and put it on so no one could see, and By the time I used up all of the Band-Aids in the box, Mama wanted to know what was going on, and she looked at my hand and her turquoise eyes widened. It was just a chemistry experiment. I told her, there's nothing wrong, it's just a chemistry experiment. And she took me to the doctor, who said he didn't have any idea what caused such a thing. And then they took me 3 hours away to the University of Virginia hospital. Chemistry experiment, I said. To the doctor, the surgeon who operated, who severed skin from my pubescent rear end, grafted it onto the back of my hand, saved the tendons. I never told. But somebody figured something out, because I woke up in a locked ward with my hand up like this and a whole white thing around it, the size of Sputnik. And that weekend, my parents came, and I heard the word schizophrenic for the first time. And this nurse with hair coiled around her head started bringing me the Stelazine and the Thorazine, and I got the Stelazine shuffle. And the regulars started showing me how to hold on to the wall so I could walk. I was the baby on the ward. I spent that New Year's Day smoking my first cigarette in the day room, watching Carl Sandburg read that poem for JFK. Me and the regulars. Well, my hand was bandaged up, and after a few months, they said I could go on home. Lorenzo was waiting. Wasn't happy. It's mean. Die. Kill yourself. Go to the cabinet. So I did. I went to the cabinet and I opened it and I took the yellow pills and the blue pills and the white pills and the green pills and every other pill that was in the medicine cabinet, and woke up in a hospital looking up at a doctor watching his nose hair go from the right to the left, the right to the left, and this burning sensation in my throat where they'd pump my stomach. And I couldn't hear what this doctor was saying, because Lorenzo, who now had an entire satanic choir over in the corner, was yelling and laughing and screaming. And I got more meds and was sent home and shuffled. And the night that I had a milk bottle in my hand, and I put it in the refrigerator, but I couldn't see the tray. I had no hand-to-eye coordination. And the milk fell, the glass broke, there were shards flying, there was milk everywhere, and Daddy was yelling. I knew he was mad at me, but he was mad at those meds. He picked them all up, took them back to the drugstore, and got his money back, which I don't think Big Pharma would let happen anymore. Daddy had a hard time admitting his daughter needed a psychiatrist, but he promised he would find someone. He would find someone that could help, and he did. There was a new woman who was moving to town, was starting up a practice, and I went to her. I went to her a lot. Lorenzo came too, right close. But she didn't use the word schizophrenic. She used the word mood, mania. Gave me different pills. And I talked to her a lot. I got through school. I got through high school. I got to college. I worked voter registration during the civil rights movement. I got married. I had a life. And then it all went upside down again. Lorenzo came back. Lorenzo was in charge, and I was in Eastern State. I didn't miss many of the hospitals in Virginia. I hit them all before it was said and done. During one of the good periods, I decided to come to Seattle. And lo and behold, I started a business, and for no reason that I can quite explain, I was really surprised it was successful. We were working all over the world, and it was great. I was fine until I stopped liking our clients. You don't have to be crazy to not like Chevron and Bank of America and Arco. But you don't have to implode your business either, which is what I did. And then Lorenzo pulled his best trick of all. You all know better than I do what a fugue state is. Preambien lost. So all of a sudden I was finding myself in places that I didn't know I had taken myself to. And one night, I'm aware I'm at the airport at SeaTac. Baggage pickup, carousel, a lot of pasteboard boxes going around, and there's nobody else standing there but me and a guy who's sweeping the floor and all these boxes. I feel in my jacket, and I've got an airplane ticket stub from Philadelphia. And the other pocket, I've got a parking sticker from SeaTac. I go over to the boxes, and they all have my name on them. And they're all from Philadelphia. I opened the first one, sort of surprised. I opened the second one, it was just like the first one. I opened the third one, it was just like the second one and the first one. I was so embarrassed. I got them all together, and I found the car, and the man who was sweeping helped me put the boxes into the car, and I went right to Goodwill and deposited 500 Easter baskets. I had flown to Philadelphia and bought 500 Easter baskets for no reason that I can tell you. I went home. I call it my face down on the kitchen floor sucking linoleum period. I have some friends. They think mental illness is an illness, and when your friends have an illness, you go and help them. So they came, and they got me. And they got me to a therapist who has the patience of the beatific, who worked with me, who struggled with me, who got me into a psychiatrist, who went through one cocktail and another cocktail. I wore out the carpet, flipping back and forth, flipping up, flipping down. She would call. And then I told. I just want Lorenzo to leave me alone. And she looked at me and said, Lorenzo isn't going to leave you alone. You have to learn to live with Lorenzo. No, that's not what I want. That's not what I want. I'd rather what? I'd rather kill myself. I'd rather go to Philadelphia. So, I take my meds. I go to my therapist. I have a scar on the back of my hand. But in these two hands, I have built a life that's a big, full, rich, and I hope to God, useful life. And if I forget that I want to live it, I look on the corner of my desk at the one Easter basket I kept. And I remember.
Thank you, Marianne.
And for all of you who are in the business of being a therapist, thank you for saving our lives.